Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Massive matchup. LSU heading on the road to play Texas A&M in what is a football game where we see legitimate college football playoff vibes. I think this is one of the first games where you look at this football game and say, whatever team wins this game, you feel pretty dang good about their shots at winding up in the college football playoffs. And you talk about special environments. I think we're about to see one Saturday night in College Station. Want to dive into this Texas A&M team and talk about two different things. One, why I think this team is peaking at the right time. And I get it wasn't necessarily the prettiest game against Mississippi State this Saturday, but there are a lot of aspects about this Texas A&M team that you can have a lot of confidence with heading into this matchup against LSU. I think secondly, let's dive into a few more keys to the football game for Texas A&M matching up against LSU. I think there are some fascinating battles that we're going to see play out. I think headlined by probably the best offensive line and pass protection that we see in the country in LSU versus Texas A&M pass rush that might be the best in the country that we see as well. Fired up to get into it now. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Texas A&M fans. Many of y'all know I've had a blast talking about this team, quite frankly, all the way back to when Mike Elko was hired to take over this program. The amount of support y'all continue to show to the fellas means the absolute world. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one and let's start by evaluating what we've seen from Conor Weigman. And again, you go back to that Missouri game before the bye week. That was probably the best football that we've seen Conor Weigman play. And it might not necessarily get reflected in the box score, but the command of the offense, the accuracy of his footballs, and kind of the overall processing that you saw Conor Weigman have, I think that was the best version of Conor Weigman we've seen. Now you fast forward to the Mississippi State game, it was a little bit more of a roller coaster in terms of you saw some really good throws. I mean, you saw why this kid was a five-star coming out of high school. I mean, that post corner route to Noah Thomas for the touchdown, there are not many quarterbacks that can make that caliber throw. We know Conor Weigman can make those throws. Now, you also saw him make some really bad decisions. You also saw him miss some wide receivers that he should not be missing. I think one of the biggest storylines heading into this matchup is what version of Conor Weigman do you get? And you look at this LSU secondary, although it's been playing very well over the last couple of weeks, it's still a secondary that we still have significant question marks heading into this football game with. So I think you got to start with Conor Weigman. We've seen some really good. We've seen some not so good from Conor Weigman. What version of Conor Weigman do you get on the biggest stage Saturday night in College Station? I think another thing I want to continue to harp on is the offensive line. Look, the offensive line probably didn't dominate the way I expected them to dominate against Mississippi State. And you look down at the numbers and say 0 sacks, only 1 tackle for loss given, only 5 pressures on Conor Weigman. That was still a really good performance from this Texas A&M offensive line, a unit that probably was the biggest question mark for this Texas A&M program heading into 2024. I said it after the Missouri game. I'll say it again. Even though Texas A&M's offensive line probably didn't play their best football against Mississippi State, make no mistake about it, this is turning into be a strength for Texas A&M in 2024. Now, I think the biggest positive that we saw emerge for that Texas A&M team against Mississippi State is the continued emergence of Jabari Barber. And Jabari, I think they say Jabari Barber. I've been calling him Jabari ever since he transferred. Jabari Barber, you look at the two things that you really want for Conor Weigman to get comfortable running this offense. And what we saw against Missouri was give him a run game and give him wide receivers that can create separation. You look at Barber against Mississippi State, was targeted six times, caught all 6 of the passes for over 90 yards. That I would call him a safety blanket for Conor Weigman in this offense. This is a wide receiver that is really, really good at running routes and really good at creating separation early in his route trees. That's a guy that when things might not be going right or Conor Weigman is a little bit uncomfortable in this football game, which undoubtedly will happen. You know what I mean? Like when you have a top 15 matchup here, I would argue it should be a top 10 matchup. There are going to be times where the game gets a little bit hairy and you got to try to settle Conor Weigman down, not only giving him a run game, which has been very good for Texas A&M, but more importantly, a wide receiver that can just create some separation in those short intermediate route trees and give Conor Weigman some easy throws. That I think is really meaningful. And again, he's not as flashy as a guy like Noah Thomas on the outside, but I think he's going to be, well, I think he's one, we're seeing him emerge as that go-to wide receiver for Conor Weigman. But I think that's really meaningful in terms of, continuing to try to settle in and give a lot of confidence to a quarterback that, although he's in his third year of college football, hasn't played a ton, especially in these kind of environments. And so the emergence of Barber, I think, really, really big. Now you go over the defensive side of the football, and again, in the first half, it wasn't the cleanest. We saw some uncharacteristic explosive plays, and I think you got to give a shout out to Coach Levy in Mississippi State. They run. I wouldn't say it's a funky offense, kind of similar to what you see from Tennessee in terms of some weird splits. They're going to force you to, kind of cover every blade of grass on the football field, and when you have a missed tackle or a bad angle or a bad run fit, those plays that would go for 10 yards might go for 20 or 30. And you saw some explosive plays given up for Texas A&M that you probably want to see get limited. But I think, again, the biggest storyline for Texas A&M is the continued creation of negative plays and turnovers. You look at the numbers and say 3 sacks, 11 tackles for loss. These linebackers are getting downhill and creating negative plays. I think it's headlined by a guy like Scooby Williams, who we've talked about. This kid, another guy that I probably missed on heading into 2024. You go back to his Florida film and say, I didn't think he was a great off-ball linebacker at Florida. Coach Bateman brought him to Texas A&M for a reason. This kid has emerged as Torrey Nork's a very good football player. I think Scooby Williams probably playing the best linebacker play that we see for Texas A&M. Take a look at Mississippi State. He had 4 run stops for an average depth to target of negative 0.8 yards. And so this Texas A&M team, specifically in that front seven, getting after the passer, but also creating a lot of negative plays. And when you can do that, and you can get teams behind the chains against this Texas A&M defense, that's a massive problem because you do not want to sit in 3rd and long against this Texas A&M pass rush. In the back end, yeah, you saw some explosive plays, and that's going to be, I guess we can kind of get into it. The first, I think, key to this football game for Texas A&M is not giving up the deep ball. LSU and Garrett Nussmeier, 18% of his attempts go 20-plus yards down the field. Now, a caveat to that conversation is the last 2 weeks, although Garrett Nussmeier has played some pretty good football against Ole Miss and Arkansas, he was 1 of 7 pushing the football 20-plus yards down the field against Arkansas, and he was only 4 of 16 versus Ole Miss. And so this is an LSU team that wants to push the ball down the field. Again, almost 20% of Garrett Nussmeier's throws go 20-plus yards. They haven't necessarily been connecting on them the last 2 weeks. If you're Texas A&M, that feels like a massive aspect of this football game where you go back to 2023, this was a huge problem for Texas A&M. I think they've cleaned it up. They did a really good job against Missouri, maybe a not so good job against Mississippi State. That's going to be an aspect of this football game that probably determines or has a significant impact on the outcome of this football game. Number 2 is the pass rush battle. Now, look, I'm not going to get up here and say LSU's offensive line isn't good because it is very good. You look at the numbers and say 0.7% of sacks on dropbacks. So every time Garrett Nussmeier is dropping back, he's getting sacked 1 time out of 100 dropbacks. Garrett Nussmeier has been really, really good at manipulating the pocket, getting the football quick, but this is an offensive line that is really good in pass protection. And I think it's bookend by 2 really good tackles in Will Campbell and Emory Jones. Here's the caveat here. Is you go back and watch the tape, and the numbers bear this out. Emory Jones at the right tackle spot has struggled a little bit. He's given up 17 pressures on the season. And so you look at Texas A&M and say, Garrett Nussmeier has been really good at avoiding sacks. You're probably not going to have a ton of success against Will Campbell on the left side, but Emory Jones hasn't been probably as good as a lot of LSU fans expected. I think LSU fans would probably agree. Like Emory Jones, 17 pressures, those aren't the numbers that we expected from Emory Jones coming into 2024. The benefit of Texas A&M is you are elite and you are deep in the edge rusher position. So even if you have a Nick Scott and Will Campbell battle, which get your popcorn ready because those are 2 of the best at their position groups respectively going down on the left side, Cassius Howell, Shamar Stewart. There are guys that you can match up on Emory Jones who has struggled specifically with some heavy-handed pass rushers. I thought he struggled really big in a big way against Lance from Arkansas. or Landon Jackson, excuse me. I wonder if Texas A&M can convert those pressures into sacks. And again, Garrett Nussmeier has been really good at not taking sacks. Can you create some negative plays against LSU? Kind of something has to give in this football game. That battle between this Texas A&M pass rush versus this LSU offensive line gonna be really big. But again, I think there are some potential matchups against right tackle Emory Jones that Texas A&M could potentially get to. Number one here, the last key to the game on the offensive side of the football is establishing this ground game. One, it's really important to get the ground game going to settle Conor Weigman in. Like, this is a big time environment. The best thing you can do for a quarterback that you want to give some confidence and settle in is get the run game going. Texas A&M's been really good at getting the run game going the last few games. Again, this offensive line's turning it on. Le'Veon Moss is running the ball hard. LSU, from a number standpoint, has been pretty good at stopping the run. They're only giving up 3.3 yards per carry. That's 33rd in the country. That being said, we haven't really seen an offense try to establish the run against LSU. A lot of these offenses are trying to attack the LSU secondary, and the LSU secondary has shown up to give LSU a ton of credit to the heading into this football game. The only team that we saw try to establish the run was South Carolina. They ran the football for 243 rushing yards. You make no mistake about it. The biggest question mark we had for LSU's defense heading into the season was what that front seven, specifically the defensive line, was. I don't think it's a particularly great unit, and I don't think it's a particularly deep unit. And so if you can establish the run and maybe if you have success running the football and you're able to run the football 30 to 40 times in this football game and kind of get to some of the depth of this LSU defensive line, I think that's something that Texas A&M can have some success with, because again, I don't think you've seen a team really try to establish the run against LSU. You look at Texas A&M, they run the football 62% of the time. That's 12th most in the country. And so that's going to be something that we haven't really seen LSU answer the bell to. And when they've had to answer the bell, they give up 250 rushing yards to South Carolina. That's the last thing that I'm looking at in this football game. It's going to be a really good one. And again, what excites me the most about this football game is both LSU, Texas A&M, two teams that lost their week one matchups, marquee matchups. They're both getting better. Like, the version that we're going to see of both of these teams on Saturday night is way different from the version of these teams that we saw week one heading into 2024. Fired up for this one. We're definitely going to instant reaction to this one Saturday night. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.